The soldier stood in the grand hall of the royal palace, his boots clicking against the polished marble floor as he waited for his orders. His name was Kale, a seasoned warrior with years of combat experience under his belt and scars that told their own stories. He had been summoned by the royal family, not something he took lightly, but what he didn't expect was the absurdity of the task they were about to assign him. Across from him sat Princess Alara, an alien beauty whose very presence seemed like it belonged more in poetry than reality. Her skin shimmered faintly with hues of silver and blue, her eyes glowed softly like twin moons, and her hair cascaded down her back in silken waves of iridescent gold. She was breathtaking, yes, but also infamous within the kingdom. Known for being utterly useless when it came to anything remotely resembling discipline or responsibility, she was often dismissed as nothing more than a pampered ornament meant to dazzle visiting dignitaries. Kale suppressed a groan when the king explained why he'd been called upon. "You will train her," the monarch said firmly, gesturing toward Alara without looking at her directly. "Teach her how to defend herself, how to be strong. The galaxy is dangerous, and we cannot afford our princess being so vulnerable." Alara blinked, clearly unimpressed by this turn of events. She crossed her arms over her chest and tilted her head slightly, studying Kale with an expression somewhere between boredom and disdain. "I don't see why I need training," she said airily, her voice carrying just enough sweetness to mask its underlying rebellion. "No one has ever tried to hurt me before." "That's because you've never left the safety of this palace," Kale replied bluntly, earning him a sharp glare from both the princess and the queen sitting beside her. It wasn't exactly diplomatic, but diplomacy wasn't part of his job description. And so began Kale's most bizarre mission yet, turning a spoiled, otherworldly princess into someone who could hold her own in battle. As he led her out of the palace and toward the training grounds, she trailed behind him reluctantly, muttering complaints about the indignity of all this. Kale ignored her, focusing instead on the challenge ahead. Teaching basic combat skills to someone who looked like she might break if she tripped over her own feet? This would either end in disaster or become the laughable highlight of his career. Their first session started poorly, and predictably. Alara refused to wear the standard-issue training gear, claiming it clashed with her complexion. Instead, she showed up in what appeared to be some sort of ceremonial robe adorned with crystals that caught the light every time she moved. Kale pinched the bridge of his nose and counted backward from 10. "Princess," he said through gritted teeth, "you're going to get hurt wearing that. Please change into something practical." She raised an eyebrow at him, clearly amused by his frustration. "Oh, and what do you suggest? Something dull and drab like your uniform?" She twirled dramatically, letting the fabric billow around her. "This is me, soldier. Deal with it." He sighed deeply but decided not to argue further. Arguing with royalty rarely ended well. Instead, he handed her a wooden practice sword, which she accepted with visible distaste. "Let's start simple," he said, positioning himself opposite her. "Hold the sword like this." He demonstrated the proper grip, only for Alara to mimic him awkwardly, nearly dropping the weapon in the process. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, glaring at the sword as though it had personally offended her. "Why can't I just use magic or something?" "Because magic won't save you if someone gets close enough to stab you," Kale shot back, trying to keep his patience intact. "Now try swinging it." What followed was chaos. Alara swung the sword wildly, completely missing the dummy target Kale had set up. At one point, she lost her balance and fell backward onto the grass, landing with an undignified thud. For a moment, Kale thought she might cry or worse, throw a tantrum, but then she surprised him. She burst out laughing. "You look ridiculous," she exclaimed, clutching her sides. "Is this really how soldiers fight? Rolling around in dirt and waving sticks?" Kale couldn't help but chuckle despite himself. "It's less glamorous than it sounds," he admitted, offering her a hand to help her up. To his surprise, she took it, and for a brief second, their eyes met. There was something unexpectedly genuine in her gaze, a flicker of curiosity that made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely hopeless after all. As days turned into weeks, Kale found himself growing increasingly frustrated and increasingly intrigued. Training Alara was like trying to teach a cat how to swim. She resisted every step of the way, yet somehow managed to make even failure look graceful. But beneath her stubbornness and theatrics, he began to notice flashes of determination. When she thought no one was watching, she practiced late into the night, repeating movements until her arms trembled with exhaustion. It was clear she wanted to prove herself, though she would never admit it aloud. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Kale caught her sitting alone by the edge of the training field, staring up at the stars. He hesitated for a moment before approaching her. "Still awake?" he asked gently, taking a seat beside her. Alara glanced at him, her glowing eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I could ask you the same thing," she replied, her tone softer than usual. "Aren't soldiers supposed to sleep standing up or something?" He chuckled. "Only in bad stories. What are you doing out here?" She shrugged, tracing patterns in the dirt with her finger. "Thinking. About home. About everything." Her voice wavered slightly, and Kale realized she was holding back tears. For once, he didn't push her. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant hum of insects and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Eventually, Alara spoke again. "Do you think I'm useless too?" she asked quietly. Kale was taken aback by the vulnerability in her question. "No," he said honestly. "You're not useless. You're just different. And sometimes, different is exactly what people need." Her lips curved into a small smile, and for the first time, Kale saw past the facade of arrogance and privilege. Beneath it all, Alara was just a young woman trying to find her place in a world that expected perfection from her. In that moment, he felt a pang of something unfamiliar, something that went beyond duty or obligation. The tension between them grew thicker with each passing day. Kale couldn't deny the attraction anymore, nor could he ignore the way his heart raced whenever Alara smiled at him. For her part, Alara seemed equally conflicted. She teased him mercilessly during training sessions but lingered longer than necessary afterward, finding excuses to talk to him about trivial things like constellations or favorite foods. Their budding connection did not go unnoticed. Whispers spread through the palace corridors, fueled by servants and courtiers alike. The idea of a lowly human soldier falling for the alien princess was scandalous enough to ignite gossip fires across the entire kingdom. Rumors reached the ears of the royal council, who convened an emergency meeting to discuss the matter. "It's unacceptable," one advisor declared, slamming his fist on the table. "If word gets out, it could undermine the stability of the monarchy." The king, however, remained surprisingly calm. "Perhaps," he mused, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "But let us not act rashly. Let us observe and see where this situation leads." Meanwhile, Kale and Alara continued their secret rendezvous, sneaking away to hidden corners of the palace gardens or abandoned towers. One night, as they stood together overlooking the city lights, Alara turned to him with a mischievous grin. "You know," she said, "if we were caught, it would cause quite the scandal." Kale smirked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then we'll have to make sure we're not caught." They laughed, but the weight of their forbidden relationship hung heavy in the air. Neither of them dared to say it aloud, but they both knew the truth. Their love was a spark in a tinderbox, waiting to ignite a fire neither of them could control. The breaking point came sooner than either of them anticipated. During a formal banquet hosted by the royal family, Kale was stationed near the entrance as part of the security detail. He watched from the shadows as Alara entered the room, radiant in a gown that shimmered like liquid starlight. She scanned the crowd until her eyes landed on him, and for a fleeting moment, their gazes locked. But then the unthinkable happened. A group of masked intruders burst into the hall, weapons drawn. Chaos erupted as guests screamed and scattered, diving for cover. Kale sprang into action, drawing his blade and engaging the attackers. Amid the chaos, he spotted Alara cornered by two assailants, her usual confidence replaced by sheer panic. Without hesitation, Kale fought his way to her side, dispatching one attacker with a swift strike before turning to face the other. Just as the second assailant lunged at him, Alara surprised everyone, including herself, by grabbing a fallen guard's weapon and striking the attacker from behind. The blow wasn't fatal, but it gave Kale the opening he needed to disarm and subdue the man. Panting, they stared at each other, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Around them, the remaining intruders were apprehended, and order slowly began to restore itself. But the damage had already been done. Witnesses whispered about how the princess had fought alongside the soldier, defying protocol and tradition. By morning, the entire kingdom knew. The fallout was swift and brutal. Both Kale and Alara were summoned before the royal council, where they faced accusations of treason and dishonor. Their defense, that they had acted out of necessity and loyalty to the crown, fell on deaf ears. The verdict was unanimous: exile. As they stood together in the throne room, awaiting their sentence, Kale reached for Alara's hand. Her fingers trembled in his grasp, but her resolve never wavered. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The royal chamber felt suffocating as the king delivered their sentence, his voice echoing like a death knell. "You have betrayed the trust of this kingdom," he declared, his gaze heavy with disappointment. "Your actions, though perhaps well-intentioned, cannot be ignored. You are hereby banished from these lands. Forever." Alara's breath hitched, but she held her ground, squeezing Kale's hand tighter. For all her outward poise, Kale could feel the tremor running through her body. He wanted to say something, to defend them, to plead for mercy, but words seemed futile now. The council had already made up its mind. As they were escorted out of the palace under the watchful eyes of guards, whispers followed them like shadows. Servants peeked from doorways, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others casting sympathetic glances. Alara kept her chin high, refusing to let anyone see her crack. But Kale noticed the faint shimmer in her eyes, catching the light like tiny stars before she blinked it away. Outside the palace gates, a small caravan awaited them, a modest transport ship provided as part of their exile. It was little more than a floating hunk of metal, battered and patched together, but it would take them far enough from the kingdom to start anew, or so they hoped. As they boarded, Kale turned one last time to look at the towering spires of the palace. They gleamed beautifully under the twin suns, yet now they felt cold and distant, like relics of a life that no longer belonged to them. The journey into the unknown began quietly, the hum of the ship's engines filling the silence between them. Neither spoke much during those first hours. The weight of what they'd lost hung too heavily over them. Alara sat by the viewport, staring out at the endless expanse of space, her reflection ghostly against the backdrop of swirling nebulae. Kale busied himself checking the ship systems, though mostly it was just an excuse to avoid confronting the storm of emotions brewing inside him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Alara broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever find somewhere we belong?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, a stark contrast to her usual confidence. Kale paused, turning to face her. "We'll make it work," he said firmly, though even he wasn't sure how convincing he sounded. "We've been through worse. Together." She smiled faintly, though there was sadness in her eyes. "I never thought I'd miss that place," she admitted. "Even with all its rules and expectations, it was still home." "It doesn't define you," Kale replied, moving to sit beside her. "You're stronger than any title or throne could ever make you. We both are." For a moment, they simply sat there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the stars streak past like rivers of light. There was comfort in the quiet, in knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they wouldn't face them alone. Days passed, and the monotony of space travel settled over them. To pass the time, they took turns piloting the ship, tinkering with its outdated systems, and sharing stories about their lives before fate brought them together. Alara spoke of her childhood in the palace, of lavish feasts and strict tutors who tried, and failed, to mold her into the perfect princess. She laughed when recounting how she once dyed her hair green to spite her etiquette instructor, only to have the color last for weeks despite countless attempts to wash it out. Kale, in turn, shared tales of his early days as a soldier, the camaraderie of his unit, and the thrill of surviving battles that should have claimed his life. He told her about the scars on his arms and back, each one carrying a memory of close calls and hard-won victories. Alara listened intently, tracing the lines of his injuries with her fingertips, as if trying to read the stories etched into his skin. Through these moments, their bond deepened. What had started as duty and defiance had grown into something neither of them could have anticipated. Love. Not the fleeting, starry-eyed kind, but the kind born from shared struggles, mutual respect, and an unshakable determination to protect one another. But the universe rarely allows such tender moments to last uninterrupted. One evening, as Kale slept and Alara manned the controls, the ship's sensors blared to life, warning of an incoming vessel. At first, she assumed it was just another passing trader or scout, but as the craft drew closer, its markings became clear. It was a warship, bearing the insignia of a rival faction known for its ruthless expansionist campaigns. Panic surged through her veins, but she forced herself to stay calm. Waking Kale, she explained the situation quickly, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Together, they scrambled to prepare the ship for evasive maneuvers, knowing full well that their rickety transport stood no chance in a direct confrontation. This thing's got thrusters designed for leisure cruises, not dogfights, Kale muttered, flipping switches and adjusting levers with practiced efficiency. We'll have to rely on speed and luck. And maybe a little bit of magic, Alara added, her hands glowing faintly as she summoned energy reserves she hadn't tapped into since leaving the palace. Though she hadn't used her abilities openly since their escape, she knew now was the time to test their limits. The enemy ship opened fire, sending bursts of plasma arcing toward them. Kale swerved the transport erratically, dodging the blasts while Alara focused her energy into creating a shimmering barrier around the hull. Sparks flew as stray shots grazed the shield, but it held firm for now. We can't keep this up forever, Kale shouted over the din of alarms and explosions. We need a plan. Alara's mind raced. Ahead, she spotted a cluster of asteroids, their jagged surfaces reflecting the dim light of a nearby star. There, she exclaimed, pointing to the debris field. If we can lose them among the rocks, we might stand a chance. With a nod, Kale steered the ship toward the asteroid belt, weaving between massive chunks of rock and ice. Behind them, the warship gave chase, its larger frame struggling to navigate the narrow gaps. Alara continued to reinforce the barrier, sweat beading on her brow as she poured every ounce of strength into maintaining it. Just when it seemed they might actually escape, disaster struck. A stray asteroid clipped the side of their ship, tearing through the outer plating and sending sparks flying across the cockpit. Smoke filled the air as warning lights flashed furiously. Hold on, Kale yelled, gripping the controls tightly. With one final burst of speed, he guided the damaged transport into a narrow crevice between two massive asteroids, effectively hiding them from view. The warship lingered for several tense minutes before finally giving up the pursuit and disappearing into the void. When the danger had passed, Alara slumped back in her seat, exhausted but triumphant. Kale reached over, brushing a strand of hair from her face. That was incredible, he said, admiration shining in his eyes. You saved us. She managed a weak smile, leaning into his touch. We saved each other, she corrected softly. Though they survived the encounter, the damage to their ship left them stranded in the middle of nowhere. Repairs would take days, possibly weeks, and resources were limited. Supplies dwindled quickly, forcing them to ration food and water carefully. Tensions flared as fatigue set in, but their arguments never lasted long. Each quarrel ended with apologies and laughter, reminders that humor and hope were as vital as oxygen in their fragile sanctuary. During one particularly restless night, Kale found Alara curled up near the viewport, gazing at the distant glow of a dying star. He joined her silently, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. What's wrong? He asked gently. I was thinking about my parents, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you think they regret sending me away? Kale hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I think they did what they thought was best for the kingdom, but that doesn't mean they stopped loving you. If anything, they probably miss you more than ever. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't try to hide them. I miss them too, she admitted, but I don't regret leaving. Not if it means I get to stay with you. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Then we'll survive this, he promised. No matter what happens, we'll find a way. And for the first time in days, Alara believed him. As the days stretched into weeks, Kale and Alara worked tirelessly to repair their battered ship. The asteroid crevice where they had taken refuge became both a prison and a sanctuary, shielding them from danger but also isolating them from the rest of the galaxy. Supplies dwindled further, forcing them to ration even more strictly. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, and exhaustion weighed heavily on their bodies, yet neither complained. They found solace in small victories, a patch welded successfully, a power conduit restored, and in each other's company. One evening, as they sat together sharing what little food remained, Alara looked at Kale with a thoughtful expression. Do you ever wonder if we're being punished? She asked quietly. For running away? Kale chuckled dryly, shaking his head. If this is punishment, it's not very creative, he replied. Besides, I don't regret anything. Not meeting you, not standing by your side when those intruders attacked. None of it. Her lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes still carried a hint of sadness. Me neither, she admitted. But sometimes I wonder, what if we'd done things differently? What if we hadn't been caught? He reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. Then we wouldn't be here, just the two of us, surviving against all odds. And honestly, I think that would have been a lot less interesting. She laughed softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. For a moment, they simply sat there, letting the quiet envelop them. Despite everything, their exile, the danger, the uncertainty, they felt oddly content. In this desolate corner of space, cut off from the world they once knew, they had built something real, something worth fighting for. Finally, after nearly 3 weeks of painstaking repairs, the ship was ready to fly again. Kale ran one last diagnostic check while Alara stood by the viewport, watching the asteroids drift lazily outside. Her heart raced with anticipation and fear. Once they left this hiding place, there was no telling what awaited them beyond. But staying wasn't an option either. "All right," Kale announced, his voice cutting through the silence. "We're good to go." Alara turned to face him, her glowing eyes filled with determination. "Let's do it," she said firmly. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." With that, Kale powered up the engines, guiding the ship out of the crevice and back into open space. The vastness of the cosmos stretched before them, infinite and unknowable. For a moment, they simply floated there, marveling at the beauty and terror of it all. Then, without warning, another ship appeared on their scanners. A sleek, silver vessel unlike anything they'd seen before. Its design was unfamiliar, its markings unrecognizable. As it approached, Kale tensed, gripping the controls tightly. "Prepare yourself," he muttered, bracing for the worst. But instead of hostility, the ship transmitted a message. "Identify yourselves." Alara exchanged a glance with Kale before stepping forward. "This is Princess Alara of House Vera and Captain Kale Draven," she responded, her voice calm but commanding. "We seek safe passage." There was a long pause, during which both held their breath. Then the reply came, "You are known to us. Follow our coordinates. We will guide you to safety." Relief washed over them like a tidal wave. Without hesitation, Kale set a course for the provided coordinates, trusting that whoever these strangers were, they meant no harm. Hours later, they arrived at a hidden colony nestled within the protective embrace of a nebula. The settlement was modest but thriving, its inhabitants welcoming them with open arms. It turned out that the colony was home to refugees, people who, like Kale and Alara, had been cast out by their own worlds. Here, titles and pasts mattered little. What mattered was resilience, kindness, and the willingness to start anew. Over time, Kale and Alara found their place among them, contributing their skills and forging new bonds. Months passed, and life in the colony became routine. Kale took charge of training volunteers in self-defense, teaching them how to protect themselves in a universe fraught with peril. Alara, meanwhile, discovered a talent for diplomacy, using her charm and intelligence to mediate disputes and foster unity within the community. Together, they became pillars of strength, inspiring others with their courage and compassion. Yet, despite their newfound purpose, neither could forget the life they'd left behind. On quiet nights, when the stars shone brightest, Alara would gaze up at the sky and wonder about her family. Were they safe? Did they miss her? Kale would sit beside her, offering silent support, knowing there were no easy answers. One such night, as they lay beneath the shimmering canopy of constellations, Alara spoke softly. "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" Kale hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe," he said finally, "but whether we do or not, we've already changed their story and ours. That counts for something." She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "You're right," she murmured. "And besides, I have everything I need right here." They fell silent then, letting the peace of the moment wash over them. Above them, the stars twinkled like promises, endless and eternal. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As equals, as partners, as lovers bound by fate and choice. As the years unfolded, Kale and Alara's bond only grew stronger. The colony became their home in every sense of the word, a place where they could truly be themselves without fear of judgment or rejection. Their love was no longer hidden. It blossomed openly, celebrated by everyone who knew them. Friends began nudging them playfully about taking their relationship to the next level. But Kale and Alara didn't need much convincing. They'd known for some time that their lives were meant to intertwine forever. One crisp evening, as the twin moons of the nebula bathed the settlement in silvery light, Kale took Alara's hand and led her to a secluded hill overlooking the colony. He had planned this moment carefully, knowing how much she loved the stars. When they reached the top, he turned to face her, his heart pounding with both nerves and excitement. "Alara," he began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "You've changed everything for me. You've shown me what it means to fight not just for survival, but for something worth living for. I can't imagine my life without you." He dropped to one knee then, pulling out a simple yet elegant ring he'd crafted himself from materials scavenged during their repairs. It shimmered faintly, catching the moonlight like stardust. Alara gasped, tears welling in her glowing eyes as she stared at him in awe. "Will you marry me?" Cale asked, his gaze unwavering. For a moment, she couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion swelling within her. Then, with a radiant smile that lit up the night, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. 1,000 times yes. The colony erupted into celebration when news of their engagement spread. Preparations for the wedding began immediately, with everyone pitching in to make the event unforgettable. The ceremony was held under the open sky, surrounded by friends who had become family. Alara wore a gown woven from threads that sparkled like starlight, while Cale stood tall in his uniform, his scars telling silent stories of battles fought and won. As they exchanged vows beneath the watchful gaze of the twin moons, there wasn't a dry eye among the gathered crowd. Promising to stand by each other through all the trials and triumphs life might bring, they sealed their union with a kiss that echoed with love and hope. Their married life was filled with laughter, adventure, and an ever-growing family. Within a few years, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Lyra, whose skin shimmered faintly like her mother's and whose laugh could brighten even the darkest days. She was followed by 2 more children, Orion, a curious boy with a knack for tinkering inherited from his father, and Mira, a spirited girl whose imagination seemed limitless. Raising their children in the colony brought its own set of challenges, but also immense joy. Cale taught them self-defense and survival skills, instilling in them the same resilience he had learned through his years as a soldier. Alara, on the other hand, nurtured their creativity and compassion, encouraging them to dream big and care deeply for others. Together, they created a home filled with warmth, understanding, and boundless possibilities. The children quickly became beloved figures in the community, often seen racing through the streets or helping neighbors with chores. Lyra had a gift for diplomacy, much like her mother, and often mediated playful squabbles between her siblings. Orion spent hours dismantling and rebuilding gadgets, earning admiration and occasional exasperation from his parents. Mira, meanwhile, charmed everyone with her endless curiosity and infectious energy. Despite their busy lives, Cale and Alara always made time for each other. Whether it was sharing quiet moments watching the stars or embarking on small adventures beyond the colony's borders, they cherished the connection that had brought them together. Their love remained as steadfast as ever, a beacon guiding them through whatever storms life threw their way. Peace reigned over the colony for many years, thanks in part to the efforts of Cale and Alara. They worked tirelessly to ensure its prosperity, fostering unity and cooperation among its inhabitants. Word of their leadership spread, drawing refugees from distant corners of the galaxy seeking refuge. The settlement grew larger and more vibrant, becoming a symbol of hope for those who had lost everything. Yet, even in peace, shadows lingered. Rumors occasionally reached them of unrest in the kingdom they had left behind, of power struggles and political turmoil. But Cale and Alara chose not to dwell on the past. Instead, they focused on building a future for their children and the generations to come. On quiet nights, they would sit together outside their modest home, watching the stars twinkle above. Sometimes Alara would wonder aloud if her parents ever thought of her, if they regretted their decision to exile her. Cale would squeeze her hand reassuringly, reminding her that she had found a new kind of happiness, one that surpassed anything royalty could offer. "You're still a princess to me," he would say with a grin, earning an affectionate roll of her eyes. "And don't forget, I'm your loyal knight." She would laugh, leaning into him as the cool night breeze carried away their worries. Life wasn't perfect, it never had been, but it was theirs, and that was enough. Decades passed, and Cale and Alara grew older alongside the colony they had helped build. Their hair grayed, and lines etched themselves onto their faces, but their spirits remained youthful. Lyra, Orion, and Mira grew into remarkable adults, each carving their own paths while staying true to the values their parents had instilled in them. The grandchildren arrived soon after, filling their home with renewed laughter and chaos. When Cale and Alara finally retired from their roles as leaders of the colony, They handed the reins to their children, confident that the next generation would carry the torch. They spent their remaining years tending to a small garden, reading stories to their grandchildren, and gazing at the stars they had once dreamed of exploring. On the night Kale passed away, cradled in Alara's arms beneath the twin moons, she felt no sorrow, only gratitude. He had given her a lifetime of love, adventure, and purpose. She whispered her final goodbye, promising to meet him again among the stars. When Alara joined him years later, their children released a lantern into the sky, letting it drift upward until it disappeared among the constellations. It was said that on clear nights, the lights of those lanterns could still be seen twinkling above the colony, a testament to the enduring legacy of two souls who had defied fate to find each other. And so, Kale and Alara's story came full circle, not as soldiers or royals, but as partners who had built a life rooted in love, resilience, and hope. Their descendants continued to thrive, carrying forward the lessons they had taught. That home is not a place, but the people you choose to share it with. Under the endless expanse of the cosmos, their legend lived on, a tale of love that conquered all.